Greetings fanboys and fangirls, Jared here with another video review from Fanboys Forever. And today I bring you one of the greatest crossovers since peanut butter and chocolate. It's the new Masterverse CGI He-Man figure. Of course, this is based on the Netflix CGI series He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which is such a great show and so much fun, and I've had a blast watching through it. I've been particularly excited about this release since we saw it announced, just because it was so unexpected. You have this gigantic figure, this Hulk of a He-Man, that seems so true to the animation model while still doing a few little things of its own. So it's been just a release that's really excited me and definitely not the kind of by the numbers thing that I thought they would do. But before we have a look at the figure, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, and of course be sure to like and comment at the end of the video. I would love to hear your thoughts about this figure. With that out of the way, let's have a look at this brand new He-Man. First of all, we have the Masterverse packaging. It's not something that particularly does it for me. I've been complaining about it since the day we got it, but it has grown on me a little over time, particularly because I guess with the packaging looking a little more plain and having just a giant window on the front, it really does highlight how cool a lot of these figures are getting, particularly because lately the Masterverse line has just been so much better. So I don't mind it too much. You can see our standard stuff, Master of the Power of Grayskull, and on the back we get something sort of interesting. It's definitely artwork of He-Man from the series and is very true to the actual animation we see in the show, aside from not being CGI. It says, living among the Tiger tribe with no memory of who he is or where he comes from, Adam discovers his destiny, or rather destiny discovered him. The sword of power found its champion, changing Adam into He-Man. Using the power of Grayskull, He-Man transformed his friends and allies. Combining their might, they declare, we have the power. Yeah, it kind of makes me want that castle now so I can put it behind him. And you know, it'd be way too small, but still. On the side, we have some really nice artwork. Something they've been kind of bringing to our attention more lately in some of the behind the scenes stuff is how they commission two pieces of artwork and then just kind of put them where they fit best on the package. I really wish that that artwork was somehow featured on the front, but it's such a shame that the beautiful art doesn't really make it to the more bland front of the package. And if you need the UPC, here it is. And Mattel is still doing that bizarre thing where the UPC is at the top. All right, let's go ahead and crack this guy open. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the sculpt. Now, just having a look, it appears that they've really nailed the digital source for this. And of course, this is a CGI series, and He-Man definitely follows the modern kind of kids CGI styling that we see in a lot of movies and TV shows, and this does the best job of any product that's been released so far of replicating that. Some of the things that this gets right that others have kind of failed to get right was the ratio between the bulk of He-Man and the head, because that's been a little tough. I think the basic one almost went a little too extreme with that, and we'll look at it later. I also think that they've gotten like the tone and size of He-Man's muscle correct for this, because it's a very kind of Pixar-esque look to it, and I think that this does the job. This also has more of the paint hits and extra details that are usually forgotten in any other version that we've seen. Things like the little added yellow and charged highlights, and things like the pants doing kind of some wraps down here around the knees. So there's just a lot that it manages to get right. Particularly the actual face sculpt is just right on, so much so that you would think it would have to be from the actual show's digital model. Going to the back here, we'll have a look at the sword here in a moment, but you can see so much of the great detail that's on the back. You can tell just by the light hitting it here that this does actually have that great kind of superhero costume texture, I guess, is the only way I know how to describe it. And it's kind of woven in. The harness itself is actually glued into position, so this isn't some kind of removable piece. Moving on down, that loincloth kind of piece, an incredibly realistic kind of folded sculpt to it, as if it's just hanging there. What's great is that all of the copyright information is on the other side of it, so there is nothing like that to break up the sculpt or look unsightly. They even went to the trouble of doing all of the individual paint hits, like everything back here, and didn't leave those out, which is pretty good considering the base price of this guy, which we'll get into later. Down here we do have some incredible extra details. In the bottoms of his boots, he actually has that Grayskull or Power of Grayskull logo there, and that is just great. I always appreciate it when there's some kind of Easter egg underneath the boots. Even He-Man's big old meat hooks here look really cool. This one doesn't have quite as good of alignment as the other. With the dark blue paint, you can see that it kind of stops short of where it should. It's not really too big of a deal, but this one does have it correctly applied. One of my favorite bits of detail in this guy is the harness itself. This is a terrific design that they came up with in this cartoon. As a matter of fact, it's some of the best design work I've seen in years for a logo for something. You can see that it's the power sword, but there's an H and an M just crossed over, creating something that looks enough like the old kind of cross symbol that he used to wear, while also looking like the H that we saw He-Man wear later. It's practically the perfect new He-Man logo. And if they don't use it for this this possible, and I do say possible because it's not happened yet, a live action film, then they're crazy, because they really should use this excellent piece of design work. Now that we've got all the details out of the way, we should go ahead and look at his accessory. And because this guy is so bulky, like I said, he's not super tall, but because of just the mass of the figure, he's not going to come with an alternate head or some kind of energy effect or something like that. He's instead going to come with a power sword. Now, I will go ahead and tell you that the hand isn't very pliable, so it's almost kind of difficult to get the sword in there. And after quite a bit of struggle, I was finally able to get the sword in there. I will say that it doesn't hold very tight in his hand unless you push it all the way in, and it will fit into kind of a ridge back here. You can see it just sculpted in, and that gives it kind of a pretty strong grip. And so I appreciate their planning on that, because I thought for sure when I was first putting it in the hand that it probably wouldn't hold that well. The detail on this sword is great. We've seen a lot of different versions of this sword now, thanks to the basic line, and now the TV 4-pack having its own vac metallized version. But this is by far the best, because they actually go to the trouble of doing the gold tones, and then you have this kind of brass, and then the darker gray, and it's kind of hard to see in these bright lights. And then on top we have the silver brushed over. So it leads to the most accurate version of the power sword, and you can see that that detail goes on the other side as well. So I do think that this works really well. I think the only issue with this accessory is that He-Man doesn't include a hand for his right here that would have a hinge going this way, so that you can more effectively hold up the power sword and have it angled down like this. It sort of leads to this being about the best you can possibly do, which isn't really bad at all. But if you want to put the arm further up, then yeah, you would need that little hinge there. So that is one shame about the accessory. And although it's a minor gripe, this probably doesn't hold as well as it needs to back here, where you can plug it in for storage. But it will work better if you definitely push it a little bit harder, and then it's probably not going anywhere. But just working with the figure not having that pushed in quite enough, I have managed to dislodge it accidentally a couple of times. Interestingly, this sword is almost the same height as He-Man himself, so it's a giant sword. The sword doesn't have any foot pegs on it or anything, but it is big enough to where He-Man can surf on it. And if you're thinking, huh? Well, if you watch the show, I think maybe he starts doing that in the second season or something. He-Man does fly around on the power sword sometimes, and they made sure his feet were just small enough and the sword was just big enough to where he can do that if you need him to. So I actually think that's pretty cool. It would have been great if there was a way to secure him on there, but you know, you can't have everything. Of course, He-Man does include 2 alternate hands, which I was very surprised about, because you would almost think that with the figure being so big, he wouldn't have anything like this. They're very easy to switch out. Just give it a tug, and of course, replace. If you want He-Man to give somebody a knuckle sandwich, here you go. Articulation is definitely going to be the most divisive category with this guy, because of course, this is an incredibly accurate sculpt to the TV show. However, that accuracy does come with some caveats and does come with a price. First things first, He-Man's head can go left and right and just a tiny little bit of up and down. I would have loved for there to have been some kind of hinge in the neck, but that might have compromised the look of the sculpt. However, it's enough for me, but with a big character like this, you want him to be able to look down maybe a little bit more. Now, here's the thing. These slots on the inside are plenty big enough to allow He-Man to do just whatever he needs to do, really, when it comes to the range and the shoulders. However, the one thing about these hinges is then they're kind of stopped by the actual sculpt of the chest. There isn't a great way around that from an engineering standpoint if you want He-Man to have this large of a chest and be this accurate to the animation. So just with hard plastic and the way that figure articulation works, it's going to stop. Now, the one thing that they could have done is, of course, hollow it out a little bit more space, and it definitely would have hurt this part of the sculpt, so some angles wouldn't have been as good looking. So I definitely think this is an all right compromise. You can see that the one bad thing is you're not going to be able to get He-Man's arm close to the chest, so it's not going to be able to go flush. This is really about as good as you can do. Like I said, not sure what they could have done here without compromising the look of the figure. You can see, of course, we do have a rotation here at the shoulder. We actually have a very effective double jointed elbow. Now, when I say very effective, I mean that he can get to 90 degrees and maybe a little beyond it, actually. Now, in my book, with a hulking character like this, if you can create a mechanism that gets you to 90 degrees, then you've done well. So I actually think that the double joint works exactly as it should. The hand here, of course, has a hinge, but as I talked about earlier, I surely do wish the hinge had went the other way to get the I have the power pose a little easier. The gauntlet swivels as well as the hand, so you can do whatever you need to do. By the way, we shouldn't overlook how cool these gauntlets are with all sorts of great detail and scratches sculpted into it. He-Man does have some pretty good rotation here at his diaphragm. He can go up a pretty good range, and of course I believe He-Man does that as he transforms in the show, or like charges up, and then he can go down a pretty decent amount as well. I wished he could go down a little more, but once again, I'm not sure how you could do it any other way if you want to have this logo not be split up by the articulation, because it kind of hits right there. So once again, you've got a situation where the designers are prioritizing the look of the figure, which I agree with here. I do think that you want to preserve this distinct look and not sacrifice it just so that he can get a 1/6 of an inch more one way or another. With that same diaphragm joint, you can do some really great rocker movement. Now here's something where the designers clearly said, okay, this won't hurt anything to be able to do this because there's nothing that's inhibiting this. So you can get some great like wall running kind of poses as he leans to the side. So I actually really like that. And it can allow him to, like, you know, charge a punch or a sword swing. So that went really well. Now, there is some rotation here, but you really shouldn't need it that much because you have rotation at the waist. At first, mine was slightly stuck, but it quickly freed itself, and I was a little worried because I knew at the diaphragm I wasn't getting much. Now here at the midsection, this is where, of course, all of He-Man's leg articulation. At first, I didn't know if it could do this or not, but the more I worked with him, the more I realized that, yeah, He-Man can pretty much flat out do the splits. So that's actually really impressive, and they made sure that this loincloth piece didn't really inhibit it that much. So I was really happy to see that, and actually pretty tickled that it was possible. Now, one interesting thing is he does have some great double joints at the knees. Of course, with the stylization of this character, that's just the way that the legs are proportioned to the rest of the body. He almost has normal sized legs and a huge upper torso, which could explain why he's not maybe quite as tall as some of the other Masterverse He-Man figures. You also have a rotation here at the thigh, and yes, the leg can go forward, and it's not inhibited as much as you might think it would be by the loincloth. But I do want you to be careful about something. The more and the harder that you stretch this, you're going to see it right here. So you don't want to go too crazy. Honestly, this is probably about what you can do. Now that may not make you too happy, but I think it's pretty decent. The boot does rotate. There's a great hinge actually at the boot, which can go plenty far enough up, but way far back. And there's plenty of rotation here for a rocker ankle pivot, meaning that He-Man should be able to flat foot practically any pose that you can put him in terms of width. So you can see that even going that far, he's all right. Don't nobody worry about him. So is this guy limited a little in terms of articulation? Yeah, but he's honestly not limited quite as much as you would think for the extreme kind of visual design that he has. And I think the designers found at every juncture a pretty good way to kind of meet us halfway in terms of articulation. So I still say that this is fairly successful in what they were trying to set out to do, and you can still get some great poses, as you'll see with the photography at the end of the review. Of course, there's plenty of fun comparisons that can be had with this guy. One of them is the standard He-Man from the kids line of figures. You can see, getting him in kind of an equivalent pose here, that this new He-Man tends to be about a couple inches taller, maybe 1.5 inches taller than him, and retains all the accuracy while going to that next level. One funny thing that you may not realize that you can probably do is have a Prince Adam that isn't that far off from being in scale if you bought the standard one. In the world of the show, he's really not that far off from being about that same size. Interestingly, the Orko that came out in the kids line is almost the exact perfect scale for this He-Man. He's in far better scale with this than he is with that basic line. We will see how he compares with a Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man. And as you can see, these guys are really close in height, with the new He-Man maybe just being slightly shorter. And this is a really funny comparison between the brand new Origins version that came in the TV 4-pack and this new one. It is interesting that the head sculpts are so similar here. I suppose that they might have been taken from the same digital source, but there's no denying that this is far more show accurate. So much so that the new head, of course, pops right onto this body, so you can easily use this if you want a more show accurate version, and improves what I already thought was a really cool figure. So this is a great bonus if you just want to upgrade this guy, or you just want something different for this guy. Yeah, kind of interesting. And there are some things in this review that we will never, ever discuss again. Ever. Forgive me, Lord. That's right, it's the best evil uncle since Scar, Skeletor. And these guys look exactly as you would expect them to together, being pretty much exactly eye to eye, with only Skeletor's hood tip being taller than He-Man. So really the last thing left to talk about is the way you can get this guy. He is just a general release in the Masterverse line of figures from Mattel. That's their pretty much 6.5 inch, 7 inch line of modern Masters of the Universe figures that's now starting to explore the entire Masterverse. In other words, every possible iteration of He-Man, something that they really hadn't focused on until this year. And with this new release here of a 100% brand new sculpt with no reuse whatsoever, interpretation of the CGI model of He-Man from the Netflix series, then they're really making good on that promise. One of the best things about this line is that they're not too expensive to get a hold of. Lately, they're right around the $23 mark. I believe I paid $23.99 for this at Big Bad Toy Store, which recently began shipping Skeletor and He-Man. Unfortunately, the collector's market of action figures in this scale seems to rapidly be heading to $25 or even more in a lot of cases, with inflation really putting the crunch on action figure collectors. But thankfully, I can honestly say that I am very well satisfied with what we got here for our money. This He-Man is gigantic. He is just as chunky a figure in this scale as I have about ever owned. You truly do get a whole lot of plastic in that package for your $23. And of course, as we all know, the Masterverse line tends to go on some really great sales at Amazon and a lot of other locations. So most of the time, you probably are paying even less than $20 for a lot of these guys. Not only that, but this is by far the most accurate representation of that CGI model for He-Man, and they do so much that they didn't have to in terms of varying the color on the bodysuit in the correct way and just creating a visually pleasing figure. He and Skeletor will be quite a set, and I think will appeal to a whole lot of people, young and old alike, because they're just striking designs, thanks to Jeff Matsuda and the others who work on that fantastic show. There's not a lot else that can be said except that you should really buy this guy. Even if you've never been that interested in the CGI show before, hey, there's no time like the present to start it up on Netflix and check it out and see what the fandom have been talking about. Of course, I want to thank everyone for watching today. This has been a lot of fun to put together, and I can't wait to have this guy lead my display in the Masterverse section. And of course, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you haven't yet, because those two things really help us out and only take a second. And of course, comment down below and let me know. Let me know your opinions and if you picked them up yet down below. And with all that being said, God bless you and yours. I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.